our day-to-day circumstances. Surah Addoha is a surah of great optimism, of much delivery in terms of delivering one to relief and joy, and it provides much comfort and consolation. Surah Al-Duha was revealed to Rasulullah during the early parts of his prophethood in Makkah al-Mukarramah, which were the most grinding days. They were heart-wrenching. They were very, very turbulent times for the early Muslim community, where it was one against all, and the Muslims were a minority. The mission of Islam was in its infancy, just like Rasulullah mentioned in a hadith. إن الدين بدأ غريبا إن الإسلام بدأ غريبا وسيعود كما بدأ. Islam started off as a strange or as a foreign religion, and it shall soon return to being something strange and foreign. فَطُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَاءِ. So blessed or so good fortune are those who are foreign. Meaning, the early stages of Islam, the Muslims were downtrodden, they were looked down upon. And then came the gradual incremental climb of Islam, during which Islam slowly ascended the ranks until it eventually became established within the Prophet's life in the entire region of Arabia. And thereafter, within 12 years of his demise, so much of the Sasanian and the Byzantine Empire, the Roman and the Persian Empire, was brought under Muslim rule. So within a short span of 40 years from being a persecuted minority to sitting on the thrones of the world superpowers, that's the equivalent of in modern day, starting off in a village in some third world country and eventually taking the main seat in the White House and taking control of the US. That's the levels that Islam climbed to within a short span of 40 years. And then we had the great dynasties, the Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasids. Islam eventually climbed into Europe, Muslim Spain, which lasted for about 780 years, or around about that number, which saw great development, great culture, and much flourishing in Europe. When one historian actually writes that in Europe at the time we were in the Dark Ages, Islam at that point was glaring with 1,000 lights. And in terms of what the Muslims then brought to Islam, we had the first person, for instance, Abbas ibn Firnas in 750 in Cordoba, before the Wright brothers, almost 1,000 years before the Wright brothers actually. He attempted the first flight, wherein he tried to make a suit and he tried to take flight, and he was called the father of aviation because he actually jumped from a mountain with a certain suit, and he managed to fly a number of meters, and then he refined it and he flew a further few more meters. So this was all going on. This was the melting pot. This was what we call the avant-garde in Spain, Muslim Spain. And then at the same time we have people like Az-Zahrawi, the father of surgery. We had people like, in Europe at the time, he had a massive work on his last volume called On Surgery. So many surgical equipment, so many pieces and appliances of surgery were donated to our modern practices through the invention of people like Az-Zahrawi. So we had a great history in Muslim Spain. So, but all of this started off very foreign in the deserts of Arabia in Makkah al-Mukarramah, and then Islam, it took the high seat, it climbed to its zenith, and then Prophet ﷺ mentions that eventually near the end of times again, Islam will decline, and it will go back to being strange. The cyclical nature of things, that what goes up must come down. Prophet ﷺ once, his horse was beaten by one of the other horses, and this troubled the Sahaba, that how could the horse of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam be overtaken by somebody else's horse. So this is when he made the famous statement that anything which rises eventually comes down. So Islam starting off as something foreign and then declining. This is prophesied in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's important is the lesson we learn from Surah Addoha in understanding how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the Prophet that he was, being the most supreme of humankind, he was still very much in touch with his emotional state and his emotional welfare. This was a time where there was great mockery taking place. The chieftains of Quraysh, the great chiefs and tribal chiefs of in Makkah, it must be understood that we like we have modern day, we have democracy and these kind of political establishments in which the people have a say to do as and put their opinions forward. But Makkah was essentially run by not a monarchy but by an oligarchy, a few tribal chiefs. It was these people who had full control over Makkah al-Mukarramah. And these tribal chiefs, they were the ones that were very fiercely opposed to the Prophet ﷺ's message. People like Walid ibn al-Mughira, Abu Jahl, Uqbat ibn Abi Mu'ayt. These people were very fierce opponents of Rasulullah ﷺ. So in essence, Rasulullah ﷺ, when he's coming with the message of Islam, he's a one-man army going against the entire establishment of Arabia. He's going against the governance of Arabia. So this message wasn't received well by the people, and Prophet ﷺ was put through a lot of difficulty at this point in his life, to the point that at one point Abu Lahab's wife, Abu Lahab being his uncle, once humiliated Rasulullah ﷺ in public, saying to him that may your hands, or may you be destroyed. Is this what you've gathered us for? When the Prophet ﷺ was propagating the message of Islam to them. So Allah revealed the verses. So his wife at one point said to Rasulullah ﷺ, when revelation temporarily stopped, she said to him, now what's happened to you? Has your shaitan, she's referring to Jibreel alayhi salam, the angel, and mockingly, sarcastically, she said, has your shaitan abandoned you? That why aren't you coming forth with any more revelation? So this really troubled Rasulullah ﷺ. So the following verses were revealed in response. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now look at the picture, the landscape that is being illustrated here. Allah commences the surah with وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Ad-duha is the light of noon, midday, and وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, and the night when it is still. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Allah is telling the Rasul ﷺ that by the oath of the noon and the night when it is still, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Just like there is darkness which seems still, it's inevitably followed by light. So the clouds are succeeded by rain, and every cloud has a silver lining, as they say. So in the same way, when things seem very dark, Prophet ﷺ is being reminded that al-duha, there's also daybreak. Nothing stays dark forever. And then مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى, he's been told your Lord has not abandoned you and he doesn't dislike you either. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. The after is better than the former. Though this is normally translated as the hereafter is better than the former, or the afterlife is better than the first life. That is true. But here, وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى, broadly understood, also means that which is later is better than that which is former. In other words, in hindsight, everything makes sense. That's why one of the famous thinkers once mentioned that you must live forwards but understand life backwards. In other words, sometimes you don't know where you're going, but once you get to a certain milestone, you realize everything that happened along the way was only contributing, everything converged to bring you to this point in time. So وَالْآخِرَةُ, that which comes later is better than that which comes before. I mean, as good as childhood is in terms of being carefree and without any problems, when we are adults, nobody ever really wishes to be in the same mental state that they were in when they were children. Because as you progress, the after state, in if you observe it at a net level, it's always better than the previous state. And this is how our general progression to the akhirah works. That eventually, once we enter the portal of death, then everything which is on the other side of it suddenly eclipses everything that we could even imagine that came before. So Prophet ﷺ is being reminded at this point that وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى, that the akhirah is better for you than the former. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, the reality of the matter is, soon your Lord shall give you and you will be pleased. In other words, the Muslim, the believer, never ever falls into, I mean, in the time and in the moment, sometimes things can be very, very overwhelming and they can be really pressing. But in the grand scheme of things, the believer never ever succumbs to total despair, because our life is not governed by this temporary existence. It connects to an eternity, and if at the end of the day an eternity is full of bliss, then what we trade off for it, which is temporary suffering and even our suffering in this world, realistically, it's not 100% concentrated suffering. It's diluted, right? For much of our lives, we spend a great portion of our life is spent sleeping. Day to day, we're eating food, we're enjoying our blessings without even realizing them. We become so accustomed to them, we're so entitled to what we have, that we become ignorant and we become passive rather than having an active attitude to appreciation. And in between that, generally speaking, the number of difficult events a person encounters in their life, they can count the major ones on their fingers. And the reason they can count them on their fingers, in contrast to their blessings, is because they are not as numerous as their blessings. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ used to ask for in his du'as. Allah, I ask you for afiyah. I ask you for prosperity, afiyah. Now, afiyah, the ulama mention, is a very, very overarching, it's a very broad term which encompasses everything. A good quality, welfare, balanced life, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He grants us everything in the balanced amounts to make our life prosperous, bearable, and of good enough quality to be delivered into the akhirah. This is what we must ask for. Once the Prophet ﷺ was asked by his uncle that give me a dua. So Prophet ﷺ said to him, Salillah al-afiyah, ask Allah for afiyah. So thinking that this dua is quite basic, quite general, he never understood from it its instantly he never understood from this dua that it was of, he never felt that he had been given something very great. He was expecting a dua that was very, very comprehensive, that included so many things, and the Prophet ﷺ just said to him, ask for afiyah. So he said, I waited for a few days, then I came to the Prophet ﷺ and I asked him, give me another dua. So he said again, ask Allah for afiyah. And then in the hadith or in another narration it mentions that nobody has been given anything after Iman better than Afiyah. Once you have the ticket that grants you grants you entry into Jannah, which is Iman, then you have the ticket, but actually getting to the destination, you need a smooth and a balanced journey, and Afiyah is what delivers you there. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was saying, that ask Allah for Afiyah, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Afiyah, and this should be a central part of our daily supplications, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Afiyah. And as I mentioned, Afiyah is a very, very broad term. It covers many areas. It's part of what we call the Jawami'ul Kalim. Prophet ﷺ was given a style of speech that was very, very comprehensive yet short. In other words, he could condense an entire ocean into a cup in his speech, and that's what the commentators of Hadith and the scholars expand through a thousand, a millennium and a half. They've been writing commentaries on his speech, and they still are extracting pearls and important lessons from what he's saying. So this is what he mentioned, that I've been given comprehensive speech. So وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Then again, this is a very unique and broad, holistic psychology the Quran is teaching us. أَلَمْ يَجِدَكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. When you're in a time of difficulty, tribulation, test, there's no merit or utility in focusing on the gravity of your situation. It's only going to pull you down further and further. What does the Quran do instead at this point? It reminds him to think, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Think of other instances in the past where you were in a despondent, difficult, trying situation, and at this point you've been relieved and you've been delivered from it. You're not in that situation anymore. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Allah is telling the Prophet ﷺ, did we not find you an orphan and we granted you refuge? وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. We found you unaware of the path, so we guided you and we showed you Islam. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. We found you to be impoverished and we made you independent. All of these, and this is the nature of man. Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. Humankind, the Quran always talks about universal ideas. The Quran doesn't discuss trivial issues. It discusses the human substance for what it is. Allah mentions in the Quran, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. Insan has been created halu'. Halu' means somebody who is always on the edge or in a state of panic. إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا. When bad afflicts him, or when difficulty comes his way, he becomes very, very frightened. وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. When good comes his way, he becomes very, very miserly. In other words, if something good happens to him, he says, this happened to me because of my own virtue. I deserve this. I got to where I am. And when difficulty comes his way, he's on his knees groveling, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rescue and refuge and protection from what's afflicted him. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in another place, وَإِذَا أَذَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنَّا رَحْمَةً ثُمَّ نَزَعْنَاهَا مِنْ إِنَّهُ لَيَئُوسٌ كَفُورٌ. When we allow man to taste mercy from our part, and then we snatch it away, he becomes despondent and very, very ungrateful. وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَاهُ نَعْمَاءَ بَعْدَ ضَرَّاءَ مَسَّتْهُ لَيَقُولَنَّ ذَهَبَ السَّيِّئَاتُ عَنِّي. And when we allow him to taste blessing after difficulty which has come his way, he says in a very boastful and arrogant manner that ذَهَبَ السَّيِّئَاتُ عَنِّي. Difficulties and hardships are long gone. I mean, I'm fully fine, I'm stable, my life is good. And this is the imbalance that insan, the human being, is always caught between, trying to, on the one hand, create an image of complete independence for himself, but when it comes to the crunch, he's really, really very dependent. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Again, so what do you focus on? And now in your practical life, so this is your mental situation. Don't focus on the gravity of the situation pulling you down. Focus on other places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted you relief. And that's in theory, in mind. In practice, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. So, as for the orphan, then don't be harsh on him. Just remember, when you see an orphan, that you were once in this state, and by doing good to him, you'll be reminded of the time that you were in that state and you were delivered. And instead of this reminding you of your current state of difficulty, it will create within you a mind frame or a mindset of appreciation and gratitude. And this is how we juggle, and this is how we balance negative modes of thinking. Think of the good times. In practice, work in a way that shows that you are remembering and appreciating your good times. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. As for the person who is begging, then don't drive him away. Remember, وَوَجَدَكَ عَيْنًا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He found you to be in a state of poverty and He made you independent. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And as for the blessing of your Lord, then declare it and speak about it openly. So Surah Al-Duha is very, very important in this regard, reminding us and guiding us, providing directives on how to navigate trying and difficult circumstances, and cultivating the proper mindset, psychology, in order to navigate the murky waters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to really, really mine from the Quran its deep and very, very rich ores and pearls that are hidden deep within, and may He condition our minds to adopt the psychology of the Quran and the entire message of the Quran. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rahmatika ya